7 minutes past 8 o'clock. Well, yesterday we were talking about the frustration many people have with endless delays by local councils. At the same time, states and the federal government are pointing the finger at each other instead of fixing problems. Well, check this out. A study by the Business Council of Australia has found duplication between different levels of government costs you and me $9 billion a year. That's $1,100 per household. Every household right across the country wasted from your pay packet.
Well, does that mean it's time to scrap one level of government? Well, let's ask constitutional law expert Professor George Williams from the University of New South Wales. Good morning to you, George. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We'll go back in history a bit. Why do we have 3 tiers of government? Given the size of our country, why?
We've got to remember the system was set up in 1901, and at that point we already had the states and local government. And when we became a nation, they decided we, of course, needed a central government as well. And they weren't prepared to do away with any of the existing tiers, so they simply added one on, giving us 3, and they locked the system down to make it incredibly hard to change.
Because we've only got 20 million people, 21 million, just over 20 million people. Is the Constitution out of date? Do we need to get tough with it?
Well, I think it is out of date. We've got one of the oldest documents in the world for a constitution, and that's, of course, a good thing. It's good that we've got a stable democracy. But on the other hand, you pay the price for the fact that we have a constitution that was drafted in a horse and buggy age at a time when it was thought we needed state governments to run the system. Remember, communications were very poor and would have been very hard for the Commonwealth government then to do what it does today. But 108 years later, I think we should be looking at these issues and asking, can we improve the system, and can we have a system that's much more cost-effective? And also, can we start dividing powers properly? So instead of the duplication and buck passing we too often have, can we get a clearer sense of who's actually responsible for what?
Because when you look, for example, the ACT, a territory with no local government, how well does that work? 2 tiers there.
Well, I think here in Canberra it shows you can work perfectly well with 2 tiers of government. I think we should have a federal system. I think it makes sense to have the Commonwealth and a second tier. You need a tier closer to the people that delivers basic services, and the ACT shows you don't need a 3rd tier. The problem, though, is that the ACT could be set up by the Commonwealth in that way, whereas the states have entrenched their position. When they set up the Constitution, they sought to protect their own role, and it means that if we were to try and do away with the states, they themselves would have to vote for that change. They get the veto. And of course there's a lot of self-interest there that means that the states are unlikely to make that shift.
OK, so that's the level you'd get rid of. You'd get rid of state. That's the one that's superfluous at the moment.
Well, I'd be merging state and local. I think we need a strong central government and regional governments around the country, and the ACT shows how regional government can work. I think you can't get rid of local government. You do need a tier of government that is well connected to the people. Think of all those local services that we depend upon, even things like Meals on Wheels and roads and rubbish and all sorts of things that you really couldn't deliver from Canberra. So I think what you do is you take local, give it some state functions, increase the size of the councils, and end up with a regional system of government complementing the Commonwealth.
Oh, okay.
How many times do you see conflicts between states on issues? For example, the Murray-Darling running across state lines. How has that interfered with the management?
Well, you only have to open a newspaper or watch a show like Sunrise to see whether it's health, education, or, in fact, some of the most important services that the community has, that they are riven and have been for a long time by infighting. Things have been somewhat better in the last couple of years, but we've got a structural problem where when we don't clearly know who's responsible for what, and when the Commonwealth has the money but the states think they have the power, you get inevitable conflict. And the Murray-Darling's another classic example where even John Howard putting $10 billion on the table from Commonwealth money has not been enough to get the Commonwealth control, and in my view that's an area that clearly should be in Commonwealth control. A river system that crosses state boundaries is surely something that you can't manage properly within any state. There's just too much vested interest.
So in other words, this country's being run by committees of governments. That's why we can't get hospitals right. That's why, stupidly, we have 6 different education systems in this country rather than just one. It just seems so sensible. But what you're saying is it's all pie in the sky because the Constitution can never be changed.
Well, I think it's pie in the sky to say we are going to go to 2 tiers of government, yes. As much as I think that's the best system for us, it's locked in the way it is, but it doesn't mean we can't reform the system. There are enormous changes we could make, particularly in service delivery areas like health and education, to have clear lines of responsibility, proper funding, and a sense of who actually is meant to be doing what. And that's a settlement we can achieve. It doesn't actually require constitutional reform in the main.
Hang on, mate. I thought that was what was meant to happen now. As a
Well,
taxpayer, I would hope that happens now.
Well, it's meant to happen, but it doesn't. And there are too many examples where governments don't do what they're meant to do because they say someone else is meant to be doing the job. And dental care has been an example for many years where both tiers of government simply pass the blame. And on the other hand, we've got too many hands involved in other areas, like universities, for example, where you've got two sides seeking control. We're dealing here with the symptoms in the main, where things like health and education come to the fore, without actually dealing with the underlying causes, and that is a broken federal system because the rules of the game are the rules set down in 1901, and they've been changed somewhat since, but not enough to recognise just how far we as a nation have come.
All right, it's kind of what we suspected, but as you said, we're stuck. George,
But it gets you thinking, and we
Yeah,
should
it
start the
does.
debate. Mate, really appreciate your time this morning. It was terrific.
Thank you.
Got to you again.
Talks a lot of sense, does it? And does get you thinking.
And
Let's
there was
not put
also
up
an
with
email
it.
from a viewer I saw earlier where he said, you know, we used to have a mayor and councillors in local councils, and now you've got CEOs, and even, you know, local councils have grown in as much as their staff and the different roles and who does what. So everything's kind of growing.
Out of control.
And, yeah, it's interesting.